Sometimes the person everyone laughs at is the only one who knows how to save what everyone else has already given up on. The laughter started before Ethan Brooks ever touched the engine. It rolled across the outdoor exhibition grounds like a wave, bouncing off polished chrome, camera lenses, and the towering glass display screens that carried the Hayes Motors logo 20 feet into the air. The annual American Innovation Auto Expo had drawn thousands of visitors from across the country, engineers, investors, journalists, and executives dressed in tailored suits worth more than some families made in a month. At the center of it all stood Victoria Hayes, Billionaire CEO, media darling, and the woman whose face appeared on business magazines from New York to Los Angeles. She stood beside her company's newest prototype, a sleek silver performance vehicle valued at nearly $3 million. The crowd adored her confidence. They admired her intelligence. They applauded everything she said. Then the engine failed. One moment the vehicle was supposed to demonstrate the future of automotive engineering. The next, silence hung awkwardly over the stage as warning lights flashed across the dashboard. Technicians hurried forward. Engineers exchanged nervous looks. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The cameras kept rolling. The investors kept watching. Victoria's smile grew thinner with every passing second. Standing beyond the security barriers, Ethan Brooks watched quietly. His faded denim shirt carried traces of grease from a long morning at his garage. His work boots were worn. His truck had nearly 200,000 miles on it. Nobody noticed him. Nobody cared who he was. To the crowd, he looked like another small-town mechanic who had wandered into an event far above his station. Finally, Ethan stepped closer. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked. Several engineers turned toward him. One laughed immediately. Another smirked. Victoria folded her arms. Her gray eyes moved slowly from his boots to his weathered face. "You?" she asked. The crowd chuckled. Ethan simply nodded. Sometimes a fresh set of eyes helps. More laughter followed. Victoria shook her head and glanced toward the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying easily through the speakers, "apparently we've found our hero." The crowd erupted. Phones lifted higher. Journalists grinned. Victoria stepped aside and gestured dramatically toward the silent vehicle. "Tell you what," she said. "Fix this engine and I'll marry you." "Deal." The audience exploded with laughter. Some people clapped. Others recorded every second. A few investors exchanged amused looks. It was exactly the kind of public joke that would trend online before sunset. Ethan heard every word. He heard every laugh. Yet his expression never changed. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He didn't seem embarrassed. Instead, he looked past Victoria, past the cameras, past the crowd. His eyes settled on the engine compartment. For a brief moment, something shifted in his gaze. Recognition. Familiarity. Almost as if he knew the machine better than the people who built it. Then he quietly rolled up his sleeves. And for the first time that afternoon, Victoria Hayes stopped smiling. The laughter still echoed across the expo grounds, but Ethan Brooks barely heard it anymore. His attention remained fixed on the open engine bay while hundreds of curious eyes watched from behind security barriers. The afternoon sun reflected across polished metal surfaces, throwing bright flashes of light across the stage. Around him, engineers whispered to one another. Some folded their arms skeptically. Others exchanged confident smiles, certain the stranger would embarrass himself within minutes. Ethan did not seem concerned. He leaned forward slightly and studied the engine compartment with the quiet focus of a man reading an old friend's handwriting. Victoria Hayes stood nearby, maintaining her composed expression, but something about the mechanic unsettled her. Most people reacted when she challenged them. Most people tried to impress her. Most people became nervous under pressure. This man had done none of those things. He simply looked at the machine. The silence stretched longer than expected. One reporter lowered his camera and muttered, "What is he even looking for?" Nobody had an answer. Ethan finally reached toward a small access panel hidden beneath a series of protective covers. Several engineers frowned immediately. One of them stepped forward. "That section is not part of the diagnostic system," he said confidently. Ethan glanced up. "Maybe that is the problem." The engineer laughed. "That is impossible." Ethan offered no argument. He simply continued. The crowd waited. Victoria watched. Somewhere beyond the city limits, nearly 40 miles away, a very different world carried on without any idea what was happening. A small garage sat beside a quiet two-lane road lined with cottonwood trees. The faded sign above the building read Brooks Auto Repair. The paint had peeled years ago. The waiting room chairs did not match. The coffee machine only worked when it felt like cooperating. Yet every customer in town trusted the man who owned it. Inside the garage office, a 10-year-old girl sat finishing homework at a worn wooden desk. Lily Brooks glanced at the clock on the wall. Her father was running late. That was unusual. Ethan always came home in time for dinner. Always. She looked toward a framed photograph sitting beside a stack of repair invoices. In the picture, Ethan smiled beside his wife years earlier. Time had faded the image slightly, but not the memories attached to it. Lily smiled softly before returning to her math assignment. Back at the expo, Ethan carefully removed a small panel no one else had touched all afternoon. A few engineers rolled their eyes. Victoria crossed her arms again. Then Ethan stopped moving. His gaze settled on something hidden deep inside the machinery. For the first time, his expression changed. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was there. Recognition. Not surprise. Not confusion. Recognition. As though he had expected to find exactly what he was looking at. Slowly, he reached inside and touched a component no larger than a deck of playing cards. Then he smiled to himself. A very small smile. The kind that appears when a mystery is no longer a mystery at all. The engineer closest to Ethan stepped forward again, unable to hide his frustration. "What exactly are you doing?" he asked. Ethan did not look up, looking where nobody else bothered to look. A few people in the crowd laughed softly, but the sound was different now. Less confident, less certain. Victoria noticed it immediately. The atmosphere had shifted. 20 minutes earlier, everyone had been entertained by the struggling mechanic standing beside a machine worth millions of dollars. Now they were curious. Curiosity was dangerous. Curiosity had a way of turning confidence into doubt. Ethan carefully loosened two fasteners and lifted a narrow housing from the engine assembly. Several technicians exchanged confused looks. One of them pulled up a digital schematic on his tablet. Another frowned. "That section should not affect startup performance," he said. Ethan finally looked at him. Should not and does not are two different things. The technician opened his mouth to respond, but stopped. He was not entirely sure anymore. Victoria watched the exchange while trying to understand what bothered her. It was not Ethan's confidence. She dealt with confident people every day. It was something deeper. He never seemed interested in proving himself. He never tried to impress anyone. It was as though the opinions surrounding him simply did not matter. That level of calm was unfamiliar. Most people wanted something from her. Recognition. Opportunity. Approval. Ethan appeared to want none of it. He reached into the engine compartment again and removed a small electronic module. The piece looked insignificant, barely larger than a smartphone. Yet the moment it came free, Ethan stared at it for several seconds. Victoria narrowed her eyes. "You found something?" she asked. Ethan turned the component over in his hands. "Maybe." One of the senior engineers crossed his arms. "That module passed every inspection." Ethan nodded. "I am sure it did." "Then it is not the problem." Ethan looked toward the engineer. "Who designed it?" The question seemed to catch everyone off guard. The engineer blinked. "What?" "The module," Ethan repeated. "Who designed it?" Nobody answered immediately. Finally, another technician spoke. "The original design came from an outside consulting group years ago." Ethan nodded slowly. "I thought so." Victoria felt a strange sensation settle in her chest. It was not fear. It was not concern. It was the uncomfortable feeling that she had walked into the middle of a conversation without realizing it. Around them, cameras continued recording. Reporters whispered updates into microphones. The afternoon breeze carried the scent of hot asphalt and polished metal across the expo grounds. Yet Ethan seemed completely detached from the spectacle. He turned the module over one final time. Then his thumb stopped on a tiny marking hidden near the edge. The faintest smile appeared again. Not because he had solved the problem. Because he had found a clue. A very important clue. Victoria noticed the expression immediately. "What is it?" she asked. Ethan looked at the marking for another moment before slipping the component into the sunlight. The engraved symbol reflected brightly across the metal surface. And the instant he saw it clearly, he whispered for words almost entirely to himself. That should not be there. The crowd sensed it before they understood it. Something hidden beneath the surface of the afternoon had begun to move. Victoria stepped closer, her heels clicking softly against the platform. "What does that mean?" she asked. Ethan remained focused on the module in his hand. The tiny engraved symbol reflected sunlight across his weathered fingers. "It means somebody changed something they were never supposed to change." Several engineers immediately objected. "That is impossible. Every component is documented. Every modification is tracked." Their responses came quickly, almost defensively. Ethan listened without interruption. Then he carefully handed the module to the nearest technician. "Check the manufacturing records." The technician frowned. "Why?" Ethan looked toward the open engine bay. "Because that serial mark belongs to an experimental prototype, not a production unit." The words landed heavily. Victoria felt her stomach tighten. Experimental prototype. Those were not words she expected to hear in front of investors and national media. One engineer quickly pulled out a tablet. His fingers moved across the screen. Another technician joined him. Within seconds, both men wore the same expression. Confusion. "That cannot be right," one whispered. "What?" Victoria asked sharply. Neither answered immediately. The younger technician swallowed. "According to the records, this module should not exist inside this vehicle." Silence followed. A different kind of silence. Not the silence of boredom or impatience. The silence that appears when certainty begins to crack. Ethan returned his attention to the engine. He disconnected a second panel and examined a series of wiring connections hidden beneath it. Every movement appeared calm and deliberate, almost familiar. Victoria watched him carefully now, not as a joke, not as a curiosity, as a mystery. The more she observed him, the more questions emerged. How did a small-town mechanic recognize a prototype component that even her senior engineers had missed? Why did he seem to understand the architecture of the vehicle better than the team responsible for presenting it? And why did every answer appear to lead deeper into the past? 40 miles away, Lily Brooks sat on a stool inside the garage while finishing the last page of her homework. The late afternoon sun filtered through dusty windows. The familiar smell of motor oil and fresh coffee filled the air. Her phone buzzed. A friend from school had sent a video clip. Lily opened it casually. A few seconds later, her eyes widened. There was her father, standing beside a futuristic car, standing beside Victoria Hayes, standing in front of hundreds of people. The video ended before revealing anything else. Lily stared at the screen. Then she smiled. "You are doing it again, Dad," she whispered. Back at the expo, one of the older engineers suddenly pushed through the crowd surrounding the stage. His silver hair caught the sunlight as he approached. He had remained silent most of the afternoon. Now he looked directly at Ethan. The older man's face slowly lost color. He was no longer staring at a mechanic. He was staring at a ghost from another life. Ethan sensed the gaze and looked up. Their eyes met. Recognition flashed between them instantly. The engineer took a slow breath. "No," he whispered. "It cannot be." Then he spoke a name that had not been heard inside the automotive industry for more than 15 years. "Ethan Brooks, you designed the original system, did you not?" For several seconds, nobody moved. The words seemed to hang in the warm afternoon air above the stage. Ethan Brooks. The name passed quietly from one person to another. Most of the crowd had never heard it before. But among the older engineers standing near the vehicle, the reaction was immediate. One man lowered his tablet. Another stared in disbelief. A third slowly removed his glasses as though seeing more clearly might somehow change what he had just heard. Victoria looked from the silver-haired engineer to Ethan. "You know him?" she asked. The older man nodded slowly. "Know him," he repeated. 15 years ago, every major automotive company in America knew his work. The crowd grew silent. Ethan sighed softly and returned his attention to the engine. That was a long time ago. The engineer ignored the remark. The adaptive thermal management system. The energy recovery architecture. The prototype efficiency platform. Those concepts changed the industry. Several technicians exchanged confused glances. One younger engineer frowned. "Wait, you were talking about the Brooks papers?" The older man nodded. "The very same." Victoria felt a strange chill despite the summer heat. She knew that name. Every executive in advanced vehicle development knew that name. The research had become legendary, brilliant, influential, mysteriously unfinished. "That was you?" she asked quietly. Ethan finally looked at her. There was no pride in his expression, no satisfaction, only calm. "It used to be." The answer somehow raised more questions than it solved. Victoria studied him carefully. This was not the profile of a famous engineer. His shirt carried oil stains. His hands were rough from years of physical work. His boots showed the wear of countless mornings spent inside a small-town garage. Yet standing before her was a man connected to innovations that had shaped billions of dollars in modern automotive technology. "Why did you leave?" one reporter suddenly asked. Then another voice followed. "Why? Disappear? Why stop?" Questions began coming from every direction. Ethan remained silent. The wind moved gently across the exhibition grounds. Nearby flags fluttered above the display booths. Somewhere in the distance, a loudspeaker announced another presentation, but almost nobody paid attention. Every eye remained fixed on the stage. Finally, Ethan answered, "Because some things matter more than recognition." The simplicity of the response somehow made it more powerful. Victoria noticed the wedding band no longer on his hand. She noticed the brief shadow that crossed his face. She noticed the way he immediately returned to the engine rather than continue discussing himself. The older engineer lowered his voice. After his wife passed away, he vanished from the industry. Silence followed once again. Not awkward silence. Respectful silence. The kind that arrives when people suddenly realize they have been measuring someone by the wrong standards. Ethan carefully reinstalled the modified module and adjusted several connections hidden deep within the system. His movements were precise. Familiar. Certain. Then he stepped back from the vehicle. "Now," he said calmly, "we can finally fix the real problem." Victoria stared at him. "You knew all along?" Ethan looked at the engine, then at the crowd, then briefly toward the horizon as though remembering another life. "The moment I opened the panel," he replied, "because I designed what was supposed to be there." No one laughed now. The same crowd that had mocked Ethan less than an hour earlier stood frozen around the stage, watching a man they no longer understood. Victoria remained silent as Ethan reached deep into the engine compartment and disconnected a narrow assembly hidden beneath a protective housing. The movement was simple, almost ordinary, yet every technician nearby watched as if they were witnessing a master class. One reporter lowered his microphone. Another forgot to take notes. Even the investors standing near the front had stopped checking their phones. Ethan placed the faulty assembly on a work table and examined it under the afternoon sunlight. "There," he said quietly. One of the engineers stepped closer. "That is causing the entire failure?" Ethan nodded. "Not because it is broken, because it was never supposed to be installed." The engineer stared at him. "Then why was it added?" Ethan looked at the component for a moment. Someone wanted a shortcut. The words carried unexpected weight. Victoria felt them immediately. Hayes Motors had spent years building a reputation around excellence. Yet standing before her was evidence that somewhere along the line, somebody had chosen convenience over integrity. Ethan carefully removed a small connector and replaced it with a standard calibration unit borrowed from a diagnostic kit. The procedure took less than 3 minutes. 3 minutes. That realization unsettled everyone. Hundreds of engineers, millions of development dollars, weeks of preparation for the biggest automotive event of the year, and the solution had taken one mechanic 3 minutes. The older engineer shook his head slowly. "We never would have found that." Ethan offered a faint smile. "You were looking for failure. And you were not." Ethan glanced toward the open engine bay. "I was looking for truth." The answer lingered in the air. A light breeze moved across the expo grounds. The giant Hayes Motors banners fluttered overhead. Somewhere nearby, a camera operator whispered, "This is unbelievable." Victoria could not disagree. She found herself studying Ethan differently now. Not as a mechanic, not as a former engineer, as a man. A man who had every reason to be bitter and yet carried none of it on his face. A man who had been publicly embarrassed and never once tried to embarrass anyone in return. A man who seemed more interested in solving a problem than proving he was right. Ethan closed the final access panel and stepped away from the vehicle. "Try it now," he said. One of the lead technicians climbed into the driver's seat. The crowd collectively held its breath. The technician pressed the ignition control. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the prototype came alive. The engine started instantly. Smooth. Quiet. Perfect. A deep, refined hum rolled across the exhibition grounds. Several engineers blinked in disbelief. One investor actually applauded before realizing nobody else had moved. The crowd remained silent. Completely silent. Not because they were unsure what had happened. Because they understood exactly what had happened. Ethan Brooks had solved in minutes what an entire team could not solve all day. Victoria stared at the running vehicle. Then she slowly turned toward Ethan. For the first time since meeting him, she did not see a struggling mechanic standing beside a machine. She saw a man whose value had never depended on whether anyone recognized it. The applause began slowly. One person, then another, then dozens more. Within moments, the entire exhibition floor echoed with the sound of people standing and clapping for a man who had arrived unnoticed that morning. Ethan looked uncomfortable with the attention. He nodded politely, gathered the tools he had borrowed, and began placing them back into the diagnostic case. The reaction only deepened Victoria's curiosity. Most people would have enjoyed the moment. Most people would have stepped toward the cameras. Ethan seemed ready to leave. "Mr. Brooks," one reporter called. "Would you be willing to answer a few questions?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I need to get home." "Home?" another reporter asked. "After this." Ethan paused. "My daughter is waiting for dinner." The answer silenced several people more effectively than any speech could have. While investors discussed technical breakthroughs worth billions of dollars, Ethan's greatest concern was making it home before evening. Victoria watched him carefully. Something about that simple response stayed with her. She had spent years surrounded by ambitious people. Executives chasing promotions. Entrepreneurs chasing headlines. Analysts chasing numbers. Yet the man standing in front of her seemed to value something entirely different. As Ethan prepared to leave, the silver-haired engineer approached again. "There is something you deserve to know," he said quietly. Ethan stopped. "What is that?" The engineer hesitated. "The original architecture you created became the foundation for more projects than you realize." Ethan remained silent. "Some of those projects generated enormous profits." "I know," Ethan replied. The engineer blinked. "You know?" Ethan nodded. "I stopped following the industry years ago. Not because I could not see what was happening. Because I chose not to." Victoria listened from a few feet away. The engineer lowered his voice. "You never challenged any of it. You never fought for recognition." Ethan looked toward the running prototype. The engine purred smoothly now, exactly as it had been designed to do. Recognition would not have changed what mattered most. The engineer seemed unable to answer. Victoria found herself wondering what kind of loss could make a man walk away from fame, influence, and wealth without bitterness. Ethan finally picked up his tool bag. The afternoon sunlight stretched long shadows across the pavement as he headed toward the exit. Then Victoria noticed something sticking out from his wallet as he placed it into his pocket. A small photograph. Just for an instant she saw it clearly. A smiling young girl with bright eyes and a missing front tooth. Ethan noticed her glance and smiled. A genuine smile this time. "My daughter Lily," he said. "She is 10. The pride in his voice was unmistakable. Victoria nodded. "She must be very proud of you." Ethan looked down at the photograph before answering. "I hope she is proud of the man I try to be." Then he turned and walked away. Victoria remained standing beside the prototype long after he disappeared into the crowd. Around her, executives celebrated the successful demonstration. Reporters rushed to file their stories. Investors resumed their conversations. Yet none of it held her attention anymore. For the first time in years, Victoria Hayes was not thinking about business. She was thinking about a quiet mechanic who had every reason to chase greatness and instead chose to go home to his daughter. Victoria Hayes had attended board meetings in 6 countries. She had negotiated acquisitions worth billions of dollars. She had faced reporters, shareholders, and competitors without hesitation. Yet that evening, sitting alone inside her penthouse office overlooking the city skyline, she could not stop thinking about a small photograph inside a mechanic's wallet. The floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the lights of downtown. Traffic moved below like rivers of gold. Her desk contained reports, contracts, and financial forecasts waiting for review. Normally, she would have worked until midnight. Tonight, she ignored all of them. Instead, she opened an internal archive and typed a name she had not searched before. Ethan Brooks. Hundreds of files appeared. Research papers, design concepts, patent records, industry presentations. The deeper she looked, the more unsettled she became. The technology that helped transform modern vehicle efficiency traced back again and again to the same source. Ethan Brooks. Yet the wealth attached to those innovations had flowed elsewhere. Victoria leaned back slowly. "How is this possible?" she whispered. The answer arrived an hour later when the silver-haired engineer from the expo joined her office by video call. Because he stopped fighting for credit, the engineer explained. After his wife passed away, he withdrew from everything. Most people assumed he would return eventually. He never did. Victoria stared at the screen. And nobody went looking for him. The engineer smiled sadly. Some did. But Ethan had already chosen what mattered most. Meanwhile, 40 miles away, the smell of homemade chili filled the Brooks family garage apartment. Lily sat at the kitchen table, laughing while Ethan helped her with a science project. Construction paper covered half the table. Colored markers rolled across the surface. A radio played softly in the background. The room was small. The furniture was old. Yet there was warmth everywhere. "Dad," Lily said, holding up her phone. "You are all over the internet." Ethan groaned. "That does not sound good." Lily giggled. "People are calling you a genius." Ethan shook his head while stirring a pot on the stove. "People say lots of things online." "Are you a genius?" Lily asked. Ethan pretended to think seriously. "I am smart enough to know when chili needs more seasoning." Lily laughed again. The simple sound filled the room. Later that night, after Lily had gone to bed, Ethan sat alone on the front porch. Crickets sang in the darkness. A cool breeze moved through the cottonwood trees. The day should have felt extraordinary. Instead, it felt strangely ordinary. Peaceful. Then headlights appeared at the end of the driveway. Ethan frowned. Visitors rarely arrived this late. A black sedan rolled slowly toward the garage and came to a stop. The driver's door opened. Victoria stepped out. No cameras. No assistants. No security team. Just one woman standing beneath a porch light. Ethan looked genuinely surprised. Victoria walked forward slowly. For the first time since they met, there was no audience watching either of them. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. Ethan studied her face for a moment. Then he glanced toward the house where Lily slept peacefully inside. The porch light cast a warm glow across the old wooden steps. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed through the night. And for reasons Victoria could not explain, standing there felt far more important than any boardroom she had ever entered. Victoria stood quietly beneath the porch light, her hands folded in front of her as though rehearsed confidence had abandoned her somewhere along the drive. Ethan remained seated on the wooden steps for a moment before gesturing toward the empty chair beside him. She sat down. Neither spoke immediately. The night air carried the scent of cut grass and distant rain. Somewhere beyond the fields, a freight train rolled through the darkness. For the first time since becoming one of the most recognizable business leaders in America, Victoria Hayes found herself searching for the right words. "I was wrong about you," she finally said. Ethan smiled gently. "That happens." Victoria laughed softly. "Most people would not be that calm about it." Ethan looked toward the stars. "Most mistakes are not worth carrying forever." The simplicity of the answer struck her harder than any criticism could have. She took a slow breath. "I spent the entire evening reading about your work." Ethan nodded. "Then you wasted an evening." "No," Victoria replied. "I learned something." Ethan looked at her. "What is that?" She hesitated. "That success and value are not the same thing." The words settled between them. Inside the house, a light suddenly flickered on. A few seconds later, the front door opened. Lily stepped outside wearing oversized pajamas and carrying a blanket around her shoulders. She blinked sleepily at the unexpected visitor. "Dad," Ethan smiled. "Everything is fine, sweetheart." Lily looked toward Victoria and immediately recognized her. Her eyes widened. "You are Victoria Hayes." Victoria laughed softly. "I suppose I am." Lily walked down the porch steps and stood beside her father. "Dad fixed your car." Ethan groaned quietly. It was not exactly her car. Lily ignored him. "He fixes everything." Victoria glanced toward Ethan. "I am starting to believe that." Lily smiled proudly. The kind of smile only a child can give when speaking about someone she admires completely. Victoria found herself smiling back. For a few moments, they simply sat together beneath the porch light. No cameras. No investors. No reporters. No audience. Just three people sharing an ordinary evening. Then Victoria reached into her purse and removed a small envelope. "I brought something." Ethan immediately shook his head. "No," Victoria looked surprised. "You do not even know what it is." "I have a feeling." She smiled. "It is not money." Ethan relaxed slightly. Victoria handed him the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Ethan unfolded it carefully. At the top was an official statement prepared for release the following morning. It publicly credited Ethan Brooks for his foundational contributions to several technologies that had shaped modern vehicle development. There were no conditions, no contracts, no requests attached, only recognition. Ethan read the page quietly. Then he folded it and placed it back into the envelope. "Thank you," he said. Victoria nodded. "It should have happened years ago." Silence followed. Warm, comfortable, honest. Lily leaned against her father's shoulder. The porch light glowed softly above them. The world beyond the little house remained loud and ambitious and endlessly distracted. But here, in the quiet of a small-town evening, none of that seemed important. Victoria looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Lily. Lily looked up at both of them and smiled. And in that simple moment, nobody cared about billion-dollar companies, industry awards, or public applause. Because sometimes the greatest victory is not being recognized by the world. Sometimes it is being loved by the people who know your heart. And for the first time in a very long while, the silence felt complete.